Zoe, thank you so much for joining me, Zoe Meggert, with Perfectly Planned Content. Let's start off with some quick introductions. So, Zoe, tell us about Perfectly Planned Content and yourself, and finally, give us one fun thing you're doing this summer.
Absolutely. I started Perfectly Planned Content in 2016 with the goal of helping business owners really just own their story and their narrative, and create a marketing plan that felt authentic to them and helped them grow a business that they really loved. I feel like in the marketing space, so often there's like the next shiny thing to focus on. Then so often it sort of just becomes like growth for growth's sake and maybe not growing intentionally or telling your story intentionally. And that's where I find like some dissonance happens. And so
Mm.
through my firm, we do fractional chief marketing officer services, and some consulting services as well, web copywriting, things like that really help advisors harness their story, and to figure out how to best communicate their why and their mission with their client base so that they can work with people they love and just ultimately love their business even more. So that's our big goal. Fun things I'm doing this summer. So I've got twin, almost 5 year olds. They turn 5 this month, and they're both going to kindergarten in the fall. So my husband and I have been joking, this is like this summer of kindergarten prep for us. We're doing like all the things. We're doing reading and math and taking them to kindergarten camp. So I don't know if that qualifies as fun, but that's what we've been up to.
Love it. Good for you. Yeah. I'll start with the fun side. My kids are 5 and 2, so in a similar boat. The older one is going off to kindergarten in the fall.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if I've been quite as intentional as you, but I've definitely thought about it as like, yeah, this is kind of last summer before real school starts. This is kind of
Mhm.
a momentous time. We just went camping for the first time
Oh,
last
fun.
weekend, and I think we'll do another one in August maybe or September. Um, Otherwise, they have their first multi-day trip to one of the grandparents' house
Oh, fun.
without the parents' plan. So
Okay.
we will see how that goes.
That's exciting. Yeah, my kids love to go to Nana and Pops's house. Like they go probably
Yeah.
once a year without us. And it's
Yeah.
like Nana and Pop's camp, and they love it. My parents love it. So that
Oh,
we are
great.
just
Yeah.
going to fall this year.
Totally. Awesome. So yeah, that's my fun thing this summer. As background, Carl Hughes, I'm the CEO here at the Podcast Consultant. I have been a longtime writer, as well as marketing agency owner. And so really I've always understood, I guess, somewhat intuitively, but also through trial and error, the importance of stories, especially when it comes to introducing very technical topics. I was a software engineer who wrote, and that's a really weird and unique combination of skills. But what I've realized is that a lot of things in software engineering tend to be written from a very dry, data-driven, fact-driven perspective. And sure, those are all important things. Facts are definitely important, but stories also resonate with people in important ways. And so we thought we'd come in here today and talk about the importance of narrative and storytelling when it comes to marketing, especially financial service firms. And again, going back to context with the podcast consultant, we help produce and edit about 80 shows, and most of them are in finance. A lot of financial advisors, investors, financial service providers. And so Zoe and I have both seen this trend a lot where the top firms tend to figure out how to tell their story in interesting ways. So I'm going to start there and kind of dive into the background of narrative, or like why narrative matters. Talk to me more, Zoe, about in your experience why this sort of topic of narrative is so important for financial advisors and financial service companies specifically.
So, in my experience, and my background was actually not in marketing. So, I went to school to be a creative writer. So, similar to you, like I've been a writer for forever. I used to write like comedy stuff. I've done fiction, nonfiction, all sorts of things. Also got started not in the finance space when I first started freelancing. It was more for like tech and software. And so similar, where it was just like it was very dry, hard to kind of communicate technical things. And the best way I found just to get information to resonate with people was through humor and through stories because it was more memorable and it really helped brands stand out. Now, the same is true in my experience now that we work exclusively with financial advisors for the finance space. And a lot of that I think is just because finance is such a trust-based industry, right? So essentially, I look at financial planners as like you're providing a service, you're a service provider, you're not a product salesperson, but you're also kind of a consultant, right? Like you're sort of stepping into this consulting role with your financial planning clients, and that requires trust and relationship. Like they need to be able to build that foundation up often before they even sign on the dotted line. Like in order to trust you with something as vulnerable as their money and their future and their goals, and to be able to talk to you and trust your insight and that you have their best interest at heart, they need to be able to have that strong foundation coming into the relationship. And what we have found is just the best way to do it. You can obviously, tout your reviews or different like showcase what you do and what your service model is. But all of that is kind of for someone who maybe doesn't get it or doesn't understand like the block and tackle of what finance is or financial planning is. Like that may go over their heads. But if you tell them a case study narrative or a narrative about your why, you're way more likely to form that connection and build that trust out of the gate and ultimately stand out from competitors.
I love that. And this is really interesting because a lot of financial service businesses, um, their marketing is purely relationship based and kind of word of mouth based. And word of mouth is essentially another way to say story based, because what it typically looks like is client A is talking to their friend, prospect B, that might work with you, and says, "Oh, I've been working with John. He's been great for the last 5 years. He's helped us manage my money. He's a great, clear communicator, and it's helped me do X, Y, and Z financial goals that I had for myself." Right? Boom, there's a story. And prospect B over here, who just heard that story, says, "Well, I'm going to go to John as well." That sort of, again, that's a narrative. Now, you didn't control it as the advisor, like it was kind of just a thing that happened, which is great. But there's a way to kind of pull that into your world and make it more your story that you can kind of own and repeat. And I think that's one of the things I was looking into before this is why stories are so important, is that they help us kind of short circuit or kind of like cut right to the part of the brain that builds trust, because it's relatable. It's something that people can hear that story and say, "Oh yeah, I've been in that situation," or "I can imagine myself in that situation." So again, these stories, they end up being very important for building trust. Like you point out, this is a high trust sale. It's not something somebody goes and the first ad they see on Google for financial advisor, they go click on it and, give you $10 million. Like it just doesn't happen that way.
It'd be
So
nice.
super important. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, it may occasionally happen that way. Like, to be fair, I'm not saying ads never work. I think they probably do, but probably in conjunction with a really good story, really good follow up, all the other things that matter. So, um, why do stories make you stand out as an advisor? I mean, is it like what is it about the advisors that tell really good stories, whether it's their narrative story, their client stories, whatever. Like, why does that make people remember them?
I think it is a couple of different things, right? And if I often think about like we just talked about, kids going to school and like trying to teach them like basic math and things like that. And often when it comes to numbers or a topic that someone feels uncomfortable with or is new, and that could be their investing, could be their retirement plan, what have you, like they're not going to look at something that's just raw data or facts and be like, makes sense to me. Like I've always thought about my stock options that way. Like that's not how they're viewing it. They're viewing it in a broader holistic context of their lives, right? So like my money and my finances or my investment portfolio, I don't look at that in a silo. And so like if an advisor is marketing, doing a ton of fact-based marketing, a ton of education, which is still really valuable. Like you want to show that you know your stuff.
Mhm.
I just need to be able to see myself in it. Really, like if it's just raw data or raw numbers, I don't necessarily connect with that. And so for me, narrative is more about building a brand and building a content strategy that communicates and exactly what you said, Carl, just helps people see themselves in what you do and understand on like a more, I guess, again, holistic level, like how you help, how it could impact their lives, like what that looks like in the context of their day to day, or how you're going to assist them as their advisor. And I also think, again, tying it back to like kids learning basic, 2 + 2 = 4. Like if I just taught them that, just like raw memorization, then they might get it. Like they might understand why I'm communicating it. But it makes way more sense if I'm like, hey, have you got like two candies? And then your friend is like a classic word problem, right?
That's right.
Situation.
Yeah.
And like if they put it in a context of a story that's relatable to them, way more likely to remember it. It stands out. And honestly, in the advice space, there are so many financial planners and just business owners out there who aren't really using narrative right now because it's uncomfortable. It may not be their
Mm.
first kind of go to. They tend to be numbers people. And so like they might not think about it this way, or maybe to them it just makes sense and like it's inherent that it's holistic and they think people should understand. But if I'm not a numbers person, which is why I'm going to an advisor in the first place, it won't make sense to me. And so it's so
Mm.
important to bring that human element to the marketing.
Yeah, those are really good points. There was a statistic I read about. There's a study done on like the role of storytelling in memory and things. And they said the messages that are relayed in form of a story are 22 times more memorable than just straight facts or straight data. And part of it's because our brain only has so much space for data, but story has a narrative, an arc that I can like attach sort of other things to in my brain. And so it's a memorability thing too. And as an advisor, I think this is again anybody doing a high trust sale, this is really important because a client does not come and buy from you the very first time they hear about you. Very rarely does that happen. Often it is multiple touch points over the course of months, years, and sometimes decades, as I'm sure some people have seen, that leads to that eventual close. And so, what's kind of important there is to think about how do I make the story really strong and consistent and memorable, so that even if somebody doesn't buy from me today, they still heard that story and it latches into their brain so that they come back in a year and when they are ready to make the decision or are ready to migrate from their existing advisor or whatever the situation is. So I think again, then coming back to memorability is another thing that really helps there when it comes to the story. I I want to ask you too about this. Like you kind of touched on this already, but let's double down. Is like financial stuff is technically hard, and I don't just mean like um, I'm pretty good at math. I mean, like I'm okay at calculus and basic math. Like I get math. But that said, stock options still kind of like boggle my mind in the way that options tradings and puts work. Now, again, that's just like one example of how it can be a very complex topic because it mixes both math with economics and just kind of some like terminology stuff that I just don't know off the back of my hand. So I think it is important to point out that as you said, the story there is more important to people who are like me, who may be at least at a high level aware of numbers and stocks and basic market stuff, but we don't have all the same terminology that a good advisor does. We don't have all the same knowledge about the nuances, the different alternatives as when it comes to investments and things like that. So I think it's super important to like be able to tie all that into a narrative that I can follow, even as a layman. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So let's talk about how this kind of looks for advisors. And let's first start with the narrative around I'll call it origin story, but it could be, the story of our firm. You already said this a second ago, Zoe, is like it kind of helps you stand out from the world of financial advisors who are out there that are just saying, hey, look, we make money for our clients. Like, of course, we're all trying to make money for our clients. That's not in debate.
And
So
that's a
question,
service-based business.
right. So question is like, what does a good origin story look like in your experience? Do you have any examples or anybody who does a good job with this?
Yeah, I have a couple, and I think it can look a variety of different ways depending on your firm, right? But I think that the more for smaller firms, like my solos or like my small teams, like 2 to 3 people, what we're typically seeing is it's a really big story about like their personal why, right? So it's why I got started in this. Often, like I've got a firm right now, we're just redoing her website, so it's not launched yet. But she was an Adobe professional, and now she works with like women in tech, and so specifically Adobe, but other companies as well. And so she's able to kind of translate like, hey, I've got this knowledge. Like, we don't want to say like insider knowledge because that's sort of iffy sounding from a client's
Sure.
perspective, but like I've walked the walk. Like I know exactly what you're going through. I have been in that position and I know how complex it is. And so I want to help you make good decisions because I've already done it. Or we have another client who, they are a father-son duo. We're out in Seattle. And it is so important to their narrative to talk about like we're the family office, like we're here to help you because we treat our clients like an extension of our family, and like really building up that sort of narrative where like the son in that duo has kids who are special needs, and so he has special needs designations, and like that's a big part of his narrative. He doesn't necessarily share a ton about his family life, but he's like, hey, I know this is hard. Like I can help
Yeah.
you because I understand like the ins and outs of the systems in Washington and where you can get resources and help and how to plan adequately for like your future is going to look a little differently if you need to think about caretakers and stuff. So like it's so helpful to build a personal narrative, even if you don't, you can be a male advisor who works with widows. It doesn't have to be like, I have done that or something like, it doesn't have to be that you had that same experience, but more of just building up a narrative around your personal why, I think is really important for people to connect with you. So that's like smaller shops, right? Who maybe are doing a really good job. bigger teams often run into this sort of like transition period where they're like, oh, shoot, what is our narrative now? Like maybe our founder had a
Hmm.
narrative 20 to 30 years ago, and now we're a team of 20 to 30 advisors, support staff, whatever. How do we build a narrative? And that often, I think, it can still tie back to your why, but I think it's more about the mission and vision you have for your team and the impact you want to make. And so firms I see doing that really well are focused on local community, right? They're building up local
Hmm.
community and wanting to empower a specific sector within their local community. And that shows up a lot, like in different volunteer opportunities they do as a firm or whatever. Alternatively, maybe they're really working with like a local company. I see that work really well too for narrative of saying like, hey, I'm based in Northwest Arkansas. There are advisors here who work with Walmart. They work with Walmart leadership, executives, and it's all about like, we have in-depth knowledge about this. We're here to empower them. And again, it ties back to that community aspect of, and you're part of this community and we want you to succeed so the community succeeds. Like that's why we're here is we saw a gap in service and we want to help. And so I think that, again, tying back to that mission, vision, and why you got started, even if it's not the same as what it was 20 or 30 years ago when the brand launched,
Right.
it's still critical.
That's a really good, interesting point and distinction is the, small individual advisor has a different type of story that he or she can tell than the one that is 30, 40 advisors, under a corporate umbrella. And it's not that their story is bad. It's just maybe less individual focused and a little more, group focused or community focused. I really like
Mhm.
that distinction. What do you do when you're talking to a new client or advisor and they say, well, I don't really have a story or a why. I just started this because I'm good with numbers. I'm good with money. I'm good with like, I know this terminology and I like to do it and I want to do more of it, and so I
Mhm.
want more clients to work with me. Like, and again, that's not every advisor. Some advisors, it is just kind of a practical job that they like to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, what do you do to help them kind of uncover what their story or their narrative might be? What kind of questions could you ask, Zoe?
This is such a good question. And I think that it's actually way more prevalent for advisors because so many people in this space and industry are amazing at what they do, are providing incredible service, are changing lives like with what they're doing with
Yep.
clients. And they're over here like, I don't know. Like I just plan for retirement. Like I'm not curing cancer. And they almost like downplay the like
Yeah.
magical effect they're having in their clients' lives. And so typically what I'll do is I'll push back and think through, okay, I kind of follow the rule of like 3 to 5, right? What are 3 to 5 instances or stories in your firm, whether it's when you first got started or when you worked for, sometimes it's like large warehouse firms and they didn't like product sales or something specific that
Hmm.
inspired them to go out on their own. Sometimes it's even like I was working with my client, Sue, who is a widow. And the moment when I told her she could retire and go to Paris, which was her dream, was like really meaningful to me. Like these moments are happening every day and they don't have to be big, right? It doesn't have to be the $10 million tax bill savings or something. It can be something as small as a conversation where a client said, oh, like I knew that like if I called you would answer. Like the markets are turbulent and I'm nervous. Like that's a narrative. Like that's a story
Yeah.
that proves, hey, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like this is solidifying to me that I'm good at what I do and I'm helping my clients, my advisor team, whoever it might be. So I try to think about it like that. Like, hey, can we brainstorm 3 to 5 moments in the history of your
Hmm.
firm or your career that highlight to you that was a good day? Like that
Yeah.
made me
Yeah.
feel good about what I'm doing. Because so often it's like it may feel small, it may feel just like every day, whatever to you. Could be like the good client feedback you get in a meeting. And sometimes it's just reviewing old meeting notes and being like, oh, right, like that client was excited when I told them they could retire or buy the second home or whatever it might be. But I
Hmm.
think that highlighting those names can be really important.
Yeah, it's a really good a good thing to think about is not just why did you start this, but like what moments in your firm gave you the most fulfillment or just like very rewarding, right? And of course, like the big wins financially for clients can be part of it, but can also be like because ultimately money's a tool. It's the things that it allowed the client to get out of life, able to leave their kid a good, nest egg at the end of their life, or they're able to buy that other home or take that big vacation that they've always thought about around the world, or whatever the big thing is. And I think you make a really good point is just thinking about like what are some of those moments like that throughout your career, throughout your running of the firm that really made you feel good about what you're doing, you know, because I think if you don't feel good about what you're doing, like you probably need to question, you know, what you're doing. But yeah, that's a really good point, Zoe. Kind of, you know, going back to one of the examples you shared earlier, which I think is a really good example, but really tough to talk about, right? Is like if you're an advisor and you've got a let's say someone in your family who has special needs, or you've got you know, you've experienced death or loss in the family, and you know what that feels like. I talked to a guy who does um I think he does like business advising, yeah, for owners who want to exit. And he was talking about some of the challenges he saw his, you know, parents face as they were aging, and the business kind of like died instead of his father ever exiting the business, because he just didn't have a plan in place. And that was such an inspiration to him. Really good story, but it's also very personal, and for a lot of people, obviously very emotional. So my question here that I'm getting to is like, how do you draw the line between sharing things that are good personal connection points and going too far, you know, and being, you know, you kind of don't want to, maybe the line's different for everybody. I don't know. What do you think about that, or how do you talk clients through that?
I think that it's really up to personal comfort level. And I also think that it's really important to draw a distinction between authentic marketing and oversharing, right? Because I think
Mm,
so many advisors are like, hey, I'm not telling my personal story. Like, I don't want to be posting about myself. Like, it feels really uncomfortable because they're pretty sure that people aren't interested, right? Like, that's kind of what
mm,
it boils down to is they're like, hey, if I overshare, I'm that person, like on Facebook and LinkedIn, and no one wants to see what I ate for breakfast. And like that's probably true. Although maybe if you're like a food blogger, advisor, or something, like who knows?
sure.
But I think that for a lot of people, it's just figuring out what your personal line is. So it could be something as simple as like, oh, like I don't really like to do like holiday posts on social media because like my clients celebrate a variety of holidays and I don't want to be
Sure.
exclusive. Totally
Yeah.
okay. For me, it's, you know, I occasionally will share pictures of my kids, like, to my newsletter list because it's mostly clients and friends. But I don't typically post them on social media unless their backs are turned. Like, it's just like a weird personal rule that my husband and I have developed that I'm like, all right, like that's just kind of where my comfort level is. But you can still build a strategy that's really authentic to you. And this is why I love that rule of like 3 to 5, because anyone can come up with like 3 to 5 unique moments or stories
Mm,
about their
mhm.
firm, their why, or them personally that they feel comfortable sharing. And the best part is you can share them again and again and again in different ways because when it comes to narrative marketing, consistency is key, right? So it's not necessarily about, oh, I'm going to share all the stories all the time. And, you know, if I'm in a position where I have this really vulnerable thing, maybe I've experienced grief or loss, and maybe I want to talk about that lightly, but like maybe that's just one of the many stories I've got like at my disposal.
Mhm.
Maybe I have the story about becoming a widow or going through a divorce on my own or helping a client through it. But then the rest of my stories can be client case studies or moments where I feel like, wow, I really had a good connection point. I was able to help them through a hard time. You can fictionalize those things a little bit so that you're protecting
Mhm.
client information and your
Sure.
information as well, without losing that authentic thread. And so I think that that's important too to kind of remember is like you don't have to share, you don't have to be an open book, like to be able to be authentic. You can just kind of pick and choose and then wash, rinse, repeat. Really kind of just keep that consistency up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's a book I read just this last quarter called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. And he writes a lot of really interesting books that are kind of like, you know, start with a scientific study and then spin off into, you know, more popular reading. Anyway, the point of the book is that the best communicators, the people who are most successful in things like hostage negotiation, business negotiation, some of these really difficult conversations tend to be the ones who get people to open up. And you do that essentially by opening up yourself. Now, again, I'm not going to tell people where they should draw their line. That's a personal thing. And I think your point is right. Like you got to kind of judge where you're at. But one of the tricks he talks about in the book is you open up a little and invite the other person to open up a little bit as well. Share a tiny bit of vulnerability, invite them to share it. And then it can get gradually deeper as you go, right? You build that relationship, and that's kind of a natural thing that happens. But where most people keep their conversations is extremely surface level. So again, let's take this real tactical. If you're an advisor and your first thing in the sales call is just purely like, all right, so how much money are you looking to put into this, and how long, what's your retirement timeline? You just talk very tactical, factual things. You're missing the whole like emotional connection to money that everybody has, you know? And so you really want to be able to open up to them and say like, look, I've dealt with these issues. I've seen clients do X, Y, and Z. They're very tough things to deal with, but we help them manage that, and we're here and available for them. And it's like, now let's talk about what's really driving this, and try to get under the hood a little bit. So again, super communicators, good one if you're like me, and I'm not a super emotionally open person by default. So I'm working on it, and I think that's been really a helpful one for me. Um, let's get into, because you've already kind of started to edge into this, telling stories that sort of highlight what your clients have gotten out of our work together. So case studies maybe is one way to call, like one thing to call these. Sometimes it's as high level as a case study. Typically, I would think of case studies as being like, here's some data, here's the client, here's maybe a little bit of story, but you could do these lots of different ways. So like, why are things like case studies and that kind of story mixed with data so powerful when it comes to financial advisors, financial service type businesses?
I think that it goes back to like one of the lessons that they really hammered home when I was doing creative writing, like in college, which was, longer ago than I'd probably like to admit. But it was just that when you're writing a narrative, it's so important to show instead of tell. And everyone has watched a movie where like, the good guy or bad guy or whoever, like there's a monologue, right? And you're like, okay, like I feel like this could have been somehow exemplified earlier in the story. Like it's frustrating, it's dry, and often it's not memorable. And so instead of saying like, well, for my clients, I provide holistic financial planning, and these are the set of services I do. And we work with your estate planning attorney, and we're a quarterback for your financial life. That's helpful and sort of touches in the narrative a little bit, but it's way
Mhm.
more impactful for people to be able to read a story of how you walked alongside someone. And often the best way to set it up is to think about what was the beginning. So, like, what were the pain points that client experienced when they reached out to you? What did you do? Like, what actions did you take? So again, showing, not telling. Like, we met with them and we were able to do a Roth conversion. We saved them a bunch of money on taxes. They were able to contribute that to philanthropy or a donor advice, whatever it might be, right? To help them achieve their goal of being more philanthropic. Awesome. Like, you achieved a goal. Then what was the end result? Like, what are you doing now? Like, kind of bring it full circle for people. And I think that dividing it into those 3 categories really helps advisors showcase what they're doing and just follow that show not tell strategy of like, this is what it looks like to work with me, and I'm not just telling you what you're gonna get. You're not just looking at a
Mhm.
service calendar like, okay, we're gonna meet twice a year. You're gonna loosely do these things for me at some point in the back end. Cause like it's too much gray area for someone who doesn't know what you do. Cause so many people who work with advisors, they pick an advisor, then they stay with them like for their whole lives, right? Like until they retire. Most people are not actively advisor hopping. And if they are, they're unhappy with their service. And it's even more important to showcase what you do and why you do it.
Mm. Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, we see this. Some of the advisors we work with will focus their podcast around these kind of client stories, and it can be a tricky line because there's an anonymity concerns or like identification concerns. There's kind of like privacy concerns and financial security concerns. But that said, if you can get clients who will open up in a medium like a podcast, a case study, a blog post, whatever that story medium is, can be really great to hear it from them directly. I think it also comes down to, as a prospective customer, I want to hear from other people like me, not necessarily just the person doing the services. I also want to hear from my peers, so to speak. And so that can be really helpful to kind of again bolster that trust and build more of it over time. The kind of related to this is like, how do we prevent or how do we maintain that sort of privacy or anonymity or whatever the client needs and still tell a good story? Is it possible? Is it something you have to kind of like skirt around names and try to make it, vague enough, but also specific enough that's memorable? Like in your experience, what do you do to get over that, Zoe?
Yeah. So in our experience, we typically take like 2 tactics, right? So first, like you make sure names are anonymous or changed, right? And just make it really clear, like, hey, this is fictionalized to protect people's privacy. Because ultimately, I think at the end of the day, if I'm a prospective client, I also want to know you're doing that, right? You're not like spilling my financial details to the internet every second you get. That feels iffy as well. So that's like one component. It's just making sure it's super clear that like this is fictionalized, it's going to remain anonymous, what have you. Sometimes we'll have advisors ask their clients if it's like a specific moment or like a note or something that they want to share, and just make sure like they're okay with it, have them sign something if necessary. like a privacy release can work. But the biggest thing that we do is we have our advisors think more in like grouping stories and then
Mm,
merging them together. So,
mm,
especially in prospect facing marketing. So, not necessarily to clients who like know themselves and can identify themselves. They're already working with you. That's not who we're talking to here. Like, it's still important to make sure that they're energized and excited about working with you still after all these years. But really, we're talking about people who haven't signed on the dotted line yet. They just want to see themselves in your marketing. And so talking about one hyper specific situation may not be the move, right? Like, so I talked about the advisor who has kids who are special needs and work with families who are special needs. Not every family is going to have the same
sure.
exact situation, right? Or advisors who work with widows. Not every widow is dealing with the same inheritance problems, or maybe she lives near a family and community. Maybe they moved to Snowbird and now they're by themselves. Like there's a wildly different range of potential scenarios that could happen here. Now, you can't cover every single one in one client case study. That would just be messy and impossible. But you can take some key details that you see repeat themselves again and again and merge them together. So I'm thinking of, I've got a client who does this really well. She works with female breadwinners as kind of like her big bucket of clients, and
Mm,
I can pull up her website too and share screen if that's easier. But basically what she's done is she's developed like a couple different case studies for the website that we kind of helped her with of these are loosely who I work with. It's like tech executives, attorneys, and then in general like business owners or female breadwinners. And we're talking very broadly about a couple different clients, but we've merged them into like one narrative where it's they had a concern with taxes or they wanted to sell their business or exit planning was a concern, or for attorneys, maybe it's growing career or starting their own law firm. And so
mhm,
maybe one client had that problem, but really we're talking about three or four different situations they faced over the course of their career and building out like this fake client persona essentially on the site.
mhm,
And that way, if I'm a prospect, even if I don't have all those same concerns, I can probably identify with a couple. And that also kind of skirts around the anonymity issue because you're really talking to a broader audience and you're not talking about one specific client saying, like, oh, when I worked with Joe last year, like, this is exactly how much money we saved him on his tax bill. That could probably be impactful, but it's still like not as relevant to every single prospect you're going to talk to.
yeah, yeah, makes sense. Let's talk mediums for distribution and how you get this stuff out there. So one thing that you know comes up in marketing often is that not every prospect is looking on the same channel. So what I mean is not everybody uses Google to search for their next, their local advisor in their area. Not everybody goes to their friends and asks because maybe they don't want their friends to know how much money they have or that they, are in that spot. Not everybody goes through LinkedIn to find people. Like, a point is there's lots of different channels to reach people. And so we want to think about how do we distribute this content on the right channels, or we want to think about where this content makes sense, like as far as, the channels that it's most organically received, et cetera. Like, how do you go through that decision-making process? Like what channels are good to distribute stories on? And, give us some tips for that so we can kind of go through one by one. Like, what do you typically see used? And then what are some good ways to sort of maximize your reach there?
Yeah, I think if I think about a marketing funnel and we sort of use like a funnel template for all of our
Hmm.
advisors who come in and just it's like how we think about marketing, right? So at the top of the funnel, there's awareness. It goes from awareness to interest, like a soft yes that people can give you, to nurture, like how are you dripping on those folks who haven't signed on the dotted line but are clearly a warm lead, to conversion, so like them saying yes, booking a call, whatever that looks like for your firm, all the way down to like how are you nurturing existing clients. So I find in general, narrative can be applied at any spot in the funnel, right? We can talk to clients about other client stories or like building up some relationship trust by being, like you said, emotionally vulnerable and but getting more vulnerability as a result. Awareness is pretty much the number one place that we see stories come into play. So
Hmm.
that happens on social media, that happens in advertising if you're doing that, definitely on your website. And then if you have a content distribution channel like a podcast, like a YouTube channel, or like a blog. So that's kind of like the number one area where we can have a lot of prospect facing narrative and kind of those origin stories or brand narratives that we want to like warm people up to the firm with, right? So wherever they're going to find us, we want them to have a consistent experience and hear a consistent story or the 3 to 5 stories that you've got kind of in your repertoire. From there, we recommend like leaning into a specific narrative. So when people want to commit, like past that initial awareness level, they want to sign up for your quiz or your ebook or whatever it might be on your website, you want to be attracting a really specific client type. And what's helpful there is thinking through, who do I want to work with the most and what is going to convert them, right? So if it's,
Mm.
hey, I know I want to work with like busy tech professionals who are career hopping. Like they're going to be on LinkedIn, where they're looking for other jobs, they're
Mhm.
trying to network and connect. That's a good place to like generate awareness and tell stories. From there, if they're truly busy, maybe it's something that is like a 2-second like interactive quiz. Maybe it's like a yes no questionnaire that they can take quickly and audit how close they are to being like ready or cognizant about what's going on in their stock option portfolio. Like whatever that might be. And then the nurture is also a good place to tell more consistent stories, yes, about what you're doing for clients, but also just about your brand, just humanizing. So, like, we've got a firm in Portland, they're very outdoorsy. One of their founders does like bear photography in Alaska, and
Mhm.
another one does like a lot of like really intensive rock climbing trips and kayaking trips and things like that. So, a lot of their newsletters are geared toward their hobbies and tying them back to financial concepts because it's way more memorable than just saying, like,
Hmm.
we do stock options and here's a blog about that. Like it's much more personal to say like let's tie bear markets to bear sightings in the wild. Like that's more fun and like more exciting. So again, I think narrative can show up at any spot in the funnel, but as far as picking what medium to use, it's really about thinking through, who is my audience? Who do I actually want to work with? Like not just the people who are going to
Mhm.
find me, then where are they going to show up? Like what sort of stories
Yeah.
make sense to plug where?
Yeah, I love that. I think another thing I'll add in there is leverage your founders or your key people's strengths. So in other words, a lot of times that clients will come to us or prospects will come to us and say, "Hey, I'm a financial advisor. I hate to write, but I love talking to people. Like maybe a podcast is the medium for me." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly the kind of medium you want to go for, right?" It's like the medium that leverages your strength as a person will be the one that you stick with and consistently deliver high quality on versus trying to force yourself to do something you hate to do. Really bad idea. Really good way to make your job like, not fun. And so, you can hire somebody like, so if you think that like, hey, we need to be on LinkedIn. I hate LinkedIn. I don't want to do LinkedIn every day. It's not my thing. Fine, but hire somebody who does because you need to be there if your clients are there, right? So there's ways to work around it, but think about where your strengths are and where you need to fill in gaps. And whether it's bringing in a marketing agency, a fractional CMO, or coming to a podcast production company, whatever whatever the outlet is for you that helps you get there, do it. Because you don't want your marketing efforts to burn you out and feel like a chore. They should kind of
Absolutely.
feel fun in a way.
Mhm. They should feel fun, and I always say, like, yeah, sometimes it's gonna be outside of your comfort zone, where, like, a lot of
Sure.
advisors don't like marketing, and that's just sort of the nature of the beast, but it shouldn't feel so unpleasant that you stop doing it,
Right.
because
Right.
ultimately consistency is key in
Yeah.
narrative marketing, in content marketing, and whatever marketing you're pursuing. If you stop and start, you're not gonna see the results you want. So, exactly what
Sure.
you're saying,
Yeah.
Carl. Like, if you hate writing, like, okay, then look at video, and it doesn't have to be perfect to get started. Or if you love writing but don't have time, hire a writer or an editor. Like you may not need a full FCMO. Maybe you need someone to give you some consulting and be a brand strategist. You can kind of
Hmm.
figure out what you can do that feels fun and then where you can get help or delegate out the stuff that doesn't feel fun but keeps moving the needle.
Yeah, love it. All right, so last but not least, let's touch on personal brand because again, I think with especially the smaller advisory firms or even bigger advisory firms where they have individual lots of individual advisors that work with different types of clients, personal brand is just inherently tied to your narrative, your marketing, your story, like all this stuff. It's just it is hard to as an advisor it, in my opinion, it's kind of hard to ignore personal brand completely. Because people are buying from people and it's a high trust sale. Like you have to have some personal reputation, even if you're not going out there and brand building like, the social media people will tell you to do. You still have a personal brand as your reputation, essentially. So, when it comes to this narrative and personal branding, like, how do we figure out like how to lean into that for our personal brands, or how do you advise advisors on doing that and making sure that it all kind of like ties together nicely?
Yeah, I think again, going back to that rule of like 3 to 5 core stories about yourself, and they don't have to be like hugely emotionally vulnerable if that makes you uncomfortable. I'll use
Hmm.
my own brand as an example, right? So I'm very outdoorsy. My husband and I like own property where we get to go hiking and we take the kids to fishing derbies on weekends. Like, and we know that's a huge value for our family. Like we go backpacking in Alaska where we get dropped off in the backcountry for 5 days. Like that's sort of our vibe and we like it. And I've built a brand kind of around that because I know it's authentic to me. It's something I can definitely talk about and like tie marketing concepts too. My logo has a mountain. I have a weird picture of bears and, my office that like is a good backdrop. Our website's super outdoorsy. A lot of our content leans that direction. And that
Hmm.
becomes a narrative that's easy to like springboard off of for a personal brand. But it can be something as simple as like when I first got started, I have two dogs, right? They're both hound dogs. And my very first logo was like an outline of my dog's face. So like I had a friend draw. So like it was just something to like build up a personal brand and be like a touch point, a talking point. It was like, I like dogs. I could talk about that. So it doesn't have to be something that like feels really high pressure or high weight or high vulnerable. Like pick a couple things about yourself. I guarantee there's
Hmm.
something. Whether you're a big reader, you love plants, you go to the farmers market on the weekends. Having a couple humanizing facts about yourself is a great way to build connection and to tie back financial concepts. And then you can also pick like I'm a big proponent of having a niche or a niche, whatever you want to call it. And so maybe it's like, hey, I do work with Walmart executives, or I'm an advisor in this really big firm and I specialize in working with young families. Like, because I'm a young family, we can talk about that. Whatever makes sense
Hmm.
for you. So I would say have like a couple personal narratives and a couple professional narratives that you can kind of communicate online. Now, whether that's on social or in videos or a podcast is totally up to you. But I think that that's a good spot to start. And then just again, repeating those for consistency's sake, people will kind of know you as like people know me as the outdoorsy marketing brand. Like,
Hmm.
oh, look, you've got pictures of hiking boots on your website. Yep, like that's us. Like it's just easy, I think, to sort of like lean into something that feels authentically you.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's also what can be kind of cool about it is regardless, so again, wherever you stand as a individual advisor versus an employee at a larger firm or whatever, like your personal brand can kind of carry with you beyond what you're doing today and into 10, 20 years from now when you're doing something very different. And so while your personal brand today might tie very closely with your work, it doesn't have to always. And you kind of break the outdoorsy stuff. Maybe in, 10, 20 years we catch up, Zoe, and you're doing marketing for outdoor brands because you've shifted what you want to do, and you moved on. That can happen, right? Like we're all complicated people with lots of factors in our life. And so I think this is a fun thing. It's a fun area where you can sort of be a little outside of the box that maybe your company would put you in if, or the company would kind of like limit itself to. The company may only focus on this, but you could be a little bit, tangential here. You could kind of focus a little bit outside that zone.
Absolutely, yes. And I think it opens an opportunity for advisors, whether you're an employee at a big firm or a solo, to exactly what you said. I've been running my business for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year. And like we've had many iterations of the services we offer, who we serve, size of advisory firm, like whatever. And because our core brand has remained the same and we're just able to tweak it to like map to new offerings,
Mm,
been able to pretty seamlessly pivot anytime we feel like we need to or want to or excited about a new opportunity. And I think the same is true for advisors building a personal brand. It's like, yeah, maybe right now you work with retirees, but maybe in 10 years you decide, you know what, like I'm really passionate about businesses who are exiting. Like I'm going to double down on that. But like if you're already kind of known and appreciated for who you are and the stories you tell, it's really seamless to kind of code switch between groups or
mm,
offerings.
great. Yeah. Let's go back to tactics a bit more. One of the things that I hear a lot is, and again, we kind of touched on this, like some advisors are not natural marketers. A lot of advisors maybe are not natural marketers. They might be able to pick out these key stories. They might be able to think about how that affects their niche or their, the space that they want to, the kinds of clients they want to help. But then putting this out into the world on their website, their social media, their blog, like their a podcast, like the newsletters, like the thousand channels we're supposed to have. Like tactically, how do people do that? Is it they have to again work with a firm like yours that gets it? That's one option. Do some of them just hire freelancers and kind of cobble this together? Some of them do they have to hire full-time people? Like what are some of is that all the options? And like how do you weigh those different options?
I think it really depends on what you want to get, like out of your
Mm,
marketing and how involved you want to be. So, kind of like what we said earlier, figuring out what are your strengths, like where can you lean in, where do you need help? And then also I'm all about simplifying. Like Carl, like you and I both know, I think advisor marketing can get so complicated so quickly. And all of a sudden you've
Yeah.
got 10, software as a services like running in the background or doing some sort of strange automation for you. And then you've got this content and you're over creating and there's so much like bad AI content out there these
Sure.
days too
Yeah.
that like, and then you're just one of the sea, right? Like you're the sea of sameness.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, that's not great. And so instead, building out a marketing funnel for your firm or for your personal brand, however you're approaching this, and figuring out like what's sustainable for me. Like, what do I know I can commit to personally, even if I hit the busiest season of my life tomorrow? Like, what could I maintain? And that may be a lot slower than people are advising you to do. Maybe it's a quarterly newsletter, posting to LinkedIn once a week, and writing a monthly blog post or doing, a monthly podcast or whatever. Now, is that ideal as far as volume of creation goes? Maybe not. But figuring out what you can commit to start is a great like jumping off point. You can
Hmm.
obviously hire people to then accelerate that. So like, okay, working with a podcast consultant might help me up my game because I'm creating more content and I'm not doing the editing. But then maybe I also know that I'm not going to distribute it to social because I hate posting on LinkedIn or whatever.
Right.
So I'm going to hire a freelancer to help with that. And you can
Yeah.
cobble together a solution. Sometimes I think that having and we offer this service, but there are many other people who do. Some sort of like a consulting engagement just to build the game plan can also be helpful
Hmm.
for a lot of advisors
Right.
who maybe they're not great at putting on that CMO hat and looking at it holistically, but they can totally implement all day. Like if they have the go-dos, maybe they feel confident enough to go get it done or work with their admin or whoever to make it happen. But it's just knowing where to start, I think, is really overwhelming because the options are so numerous. So
Yeah.
technically speaking, I would say like starting with a clear game plan where, and I can share this afterwards too, if we want to pass it out to people who registered, attended, whatever.
Yep.
It's just like what our funnel worksheet looks like. And like fill
Hmm.
in like 1 to 2 things per spot. Like it doesn't have to be bananas. Like maybe for client relationship nurture, it's like I send a holiday card like every New Year's or every Thanksgiving or whatever. For conversion, it's I use Calendly. Like it doesn't have to be crazy at each step of the funnel. It just has to be consistent. And then figuring out what
Yeah.
the stories are to kind of build them in, I think is a really good spot to figure out tactically what am I doing and what makes sense. And then just checking in with yourself periodically. Like, is this still working? Or am I just kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it stinks?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And before we start to wrap up, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in. I've got a couple that I'll go to, but I would emphasize your point there that it's not about doing all the things or hitting all the channels or following all the latest trends and hacks in marketing. It's about doing one or two things consistently and well. And so sustainability and consistency over time tends to be more important in marketing, especially trust-based sales marketing, than spray and pray, like trying 30 different things in a year. This is one of those the big, I think, mental challenges around marketing for people is they almost overcomplicate it and they think, okay, well, I got to do marketing, so I'm going to go read up on all the latest things in marketing, and you're like, okay, there's like 30 million things that people are trying and doing, and it's working for all of them, in marketing. There's no one way, and no, so you think, well, I got to do it all, I got to do what the big competitors do, which is all of these things. Like, not true. Like, you're small, and it's okay that you're small, when you're starting out. And you really just got to make it something you can do consistently for months, years, and then start to layer the channels over time and layer the tactics over time.
You got to put in the reps, right? Like in order
Yeah.
to like get better and get it done and like to get the results you want, you got to be
Yeah.
consistent and get it done.
Yeah. And then the other thing kind of related to that we go to over and over again is like making sure you're spending your time on the most effective and most high leverage things. So in other words, if you're going to have a podcast or something, hey, should you be the host who's talking to the guest personally? Probably at first. That's a good high value thing and it gets your sort of voice into people's ears, which is building trust, right? Should you be the one going into your audio video editor and like learning how to clip out clips and like, edit videos? Like probably not, like not the highest leverage task you can do and the highest leverage skill set you can have as a financial advisor. Same with content. Maybe you should be the one getting interviewed by a content writer and then having them do the finer points of writing it. Maybe you just do a final review. Maybe with the email newsletter, you should be just collecting a few links you found interesting and letting your assistant write the actual newsletter. Like again, all these things, it depends. But the question you should ask yourself is where's the highest leverage piece that I can contribute to?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, one question kind of as a follow-up to something we talked about earlier is like in your experience, Zoe, how does this narrative idea and building these narratives tie into defining a niche target market? And it seems like there's a lot of overlap here. Like, but maybe the question is like, which comes first? Do most people have a target market and they find the narratives that sort of bolster their credibility in that target market? Or is it like I build the narratives and then that helps me understand who my favorite clients are?
For a lot of our clients, it's the latter. So for a
Mm,
lot of clients who come to us, they're like, I know I should have a niche and I don't. And it's been 10 years and I don't. And like, I like working with everybody. But if I really dig in, that's usually not true. Usually they
mm,
actually do have like a psychographic niche that they just haven't
yeah.
uncovered yet. So they're like, oh, I work with people in all walks of life. But let me tell you, they all love volunteering at the Humane Society, or like they're all super outdoorsy. And like there's something that ties these people together. They're all family oriented. They all want to spend summer, like they're the millionaire next door type, like whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be like, I work with doctors or I work with attorneys. That's not necessarily true, right? And so I think doing the narrative exercise of like, what are some of those, again, don't think about it as stories, like the 3 to 5 moments in my career that felt really meaningful or valuable to me as a business owner. And then like, what's connecting those? Is it, I like to help people? Is it, oh, like these all people all have the same problem that I help them solve and that felt really good? Like, I think that will sort of bring up a niche market for people. Sometimes the opposite is also true, right? Like maybe there was a gap in the market that you identified and you were like, I'm going to serve Coca-Cola employees in Atlanta who have stock options and work in this specific, sector of the business or whatever. And then from there you can build up, all right, if I think about my Coke employees, this is different ways that I help them. And that's certainly an easier way maybe of walking backward into stories, especially if you already kind of have that. But you don't have to get started either, I think. I think just thinking about what was meaningful and what really like lit you up as an
Mm.
advisor is a good place to start as well.
Yeah. Let's go back to that bigger company, bigger organization. We've been talking a lot about like kind of individual advisors, and I think that's, to be fair, you probably work with more of them. We see a lot of them too. But we do work with some bigger brands as well, and it's in a way, I think it's harder for them to define these personal stories that really resonate as well. What do you see though from bigger brands that tell stories well and that get this narrative kind of marketing right? Is there, yeah, let's just I'll kind of leave it there. What do you see? And then we can kind of dive into some specifics.
Yeah, again, I think it's tying into like mission and vision. Like for bigger
Mm,
brands, it's thinking through why they're doing what they're doing, the impact that they want to make, and how, like the ones that I really see doing this who are like killing it, the whole team is on board. Like the whole
mm,
team is like,
yeah.
yeah, like we're an advisory firm that wants to empower business owners, or like we really want to help serve in this specific way or demographic, or maybe it's more of just like a values set thing, like we're fee only and we really believe in that specifically, or like hourly advice, whatever it might be, right? And I think doubling down on those things that tie and unify your firm is a really good way to build up narrative. And like they may not be specific client stories, although they could be like on an advisor level, but maybe it's more broadly like even thinking about pivotal moments for big firms who have sold, who have merged, like who have gone through maybe large growth spurt things, thinking about like the
Hmm.
why behind those decisions. Because every big business will run into that, right? Like we made a decision
Hmm.
to acquire a tax company. Here's why. And like thinking through the motivators, I think sometimes narrative can come from that. And often, honestly, the firms that are doing this well, it ties back to serving their clients better and offering some sort of like exceptional experience. And so like maybe you acquired a tax planning firm because you knew your clients were business owners and this was going to be a game changer for them. And like it's all about how you serve and why you serve and just really focusing in on that. And I think that for our bigger brands, that's what we see work really well.
Yeah, cool. Zoe, this has been really fun. Where can people follow up with you and learn more about perfectly planned content?
Yeah, so our website is perfectlyplannedcontent.com, spelled like just in the logo. They can always email me. It's just zoe@perfectlyplannedcontent.com. And I am most active on LinkedIn, so they can find me there as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all those links in the recording once we get this posted to the internet somewhere. I think probably on our YouTube channel. And obviously, I'm Carl, and you can learn more about the Podcast Consultant at thepodcastconsultant.com. We do a lot of work with financial advisors, investors, finance shows in general. Always happy to help when it comes to that production, launch, and auditing side of making your podcast successful. And I'm also active on LinkedIn and happy to answer questions there or via email. So thanks again for doing this, Zoe, and thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.